When we were talking about warfare in the ancient Near East, I mentioned that Assyria, in some cases, was in a class by itself. So I wanted to spend a little bit of extra time, since we are looking at the fall of the northern kingdom of Israel. We want to look at the enemy that did that to them, and we want to look at how it took divine intervention to stop the onslaught of Assyria on even something as central to our study as Jerusalem. So let's look in a little bit of detail, at least, at the Assyrian war machine. Um, Assyria had a well-organized military structure. They also believed in total war, and they were experts at that psychological warfare. Watch what happens if you read Isaiah 36 through 38, and watch what the ambassadors say to Hezekiah. And when he asks them to speak not in Hebrew, but in the trade language, so that the people would not listen to the ambassador's response. It's just a biblical example of what they used in order to make sure that nobody crosses them. And so they used psychological warfare at an expert level, as we'll see in a minute when we look at the Annals of Sennacherib. They were also skilled in a variety of military tactics. Think some people might be good at siege warfare, some might be good at warfare on open ground, and some might be good at guerrilla warfare in the mountains. But Assyria was good at all three. Their training for their soldiers was incredible, and so they were good at warfare in the mountains. They were good at setting battles in open ground, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And they were experts at attacking a walled city. So those are some of the advantages that Assyria has. Let's look at their military tactics regarding open ground. So the chariot is introduced into the ancient Near East in the early 3rd millennium BC, 2334 to be exact. And what Assyria would do is you would have a line of charging chariots. Each chariot has two people, a charioteer, the driver, and a soldier with spear and javelin. And they would go rushing into the fray, and then behind them would come the horsemen who were riding bareback with long lances, and then you would have the archers, and archer and shield bearer would work together. So one man protects and the other man delivers offense in the arrows that are delivered to the target. So this is how they arranged things when the battle was on open ground. During siege warfare, they were experts at cutting off supplies, so nobody got in or out of the city. Whatever the city has is all it has. They used battering rams against the gates and against the walls to try to gain advantage or to weaken the walls or the gates. They used siege engines. Those were often made of iron, and they used them to help batter the walls, provide protection for those who are using the battering ram, and then from the protection of the siege engine, missiles and such would be thrown. So siege engines were a part of the offensive role in trying to take a walled city. And then you had sappers who were responsible for trying to undermine the foundation of a wall. So they were experts at digging tunnels, working in such a way that you could bring about a collapse of the walls. If there's a breach, then the army can rush up and in. So that's Assyria's expertise at siege warfare. When you were beat by Assyria, you would suffer plunder. They would haul you off as captives, and often they would, as in the case of Sargon II, deport the whole population, which is why in Jewish history the northern kingdom disappears. It's because Assyria deported them to another place in the empire and then brought in other people to occupy Samaria. So some of the poor that remained in Samaria, and then the new populations that moved in, that's why the people of Samaria in Jesus' time, the Jewish people didn't regard them as Jews, but some kind of poor mixed race who had abandoned God. And so it all stems back to the Assyrian plan of deportation. In order to gain allegiance, if I'm living in a strange land with strange people all around me, and all I have for protection is the king who deported me, I now have a strange desire to win security from the very person who defeated me. Ashurbanipal, as we have here, deported some 4 to 5 million people, so much so that some of the cities that had ethnic Assyrians became a minority. There were so many other people being deported into the city. And so lots of Assyrian cities became multicultural. And that was a good thing. It didn't seem to weaken. The deportation seems to have brought about a measure of security. So we'll look a little bit more at what Assyria did through the eyes of Sennacherib. In Sennacherib's Annals, he says, this is what happened to Babylon. He said, I devastated Babylon and made it a wasteland. I smashed dams, there was looting, setting crops on fire, cutting down fruit trees, and then flaying victims. That means peeling their skin off and drying it, or cutting off their hands or their noses or their ears or their fingers, or blinding them or impaling them on pikes or putting hooks in their nose. Oh, do you see the idea behind psychological warfare is I don't ever want to fall to them people. I'd rather sue in advance for terms of peace than have to get mixed up and risk this happening to me. Let's look a little bit more at the Annals of Sennacherib. This is what Sennacherib himself wrote to record the destruction of Elam. Elam was just a little southeast of Babylon, and this is how he described the battle. At the command of the god Ashur, the great lord, I rushed upon the enemy like the approach of a hurricane. I put them to rout and turned them back. I cut their throats like sheep. My prancing steeds, trained to harness, plunged into their welling blood as into a river. The wheels of my battle chariot were bespattered with blood and filth. As to the lords of the Chaldeans, panic from my onslaught overwhelmed them like a demon. They abandoned their tents and fled for their lives, crushing the corpses of their troops as they went. In their terror they passed scalding urine and voided their excrement into their chariots. You see, they have a way with words. But as you can read, it's written to describe the horror. So again, people won't ever have a thought to rise up against such a fearful power as Sennacherib and Assyria. So this is what he wrote when he fought against Elam. What makes this next reading important is this is what he said he did to Babylon. What's interesting is Babylon resented it so much that it was one of the spurs to Babylonian Empire and the desire for revenge. So don't tick your enemy off so much that they may rise up to defeat you again one day. Anyway, Ashurbanipal wrote this as he moves into Babylon. I tore out the tongues of those whose slanderous mouths had uttered blasphemies against my god Ashur. I defeated them completely. I fed their corpses, cut into small pieces, to dogs and pigs, vultures, the birds of the sky, and the fish of the ocean. After I had performed this and made quiet again the hearts of the great gods, my lords, I removed the corpses of those whom the pestilence had felled. Whew. Oh, you see, Assyria is in a class by itself. Now I want to show you one that I think is pretty interesting. Did you notice that at least the quotes that we have here, and I understand that each is a small quote, but I have a suspicion. Notice this, both of them had pretty violent terminology. This is what I did. And they all referenced the god of Assyria, Ashur, and how he was blasphemed or how he stood to fight to bring about the victory. What I want you to notice in this next one is this is what Sennacherib wrote about his attack on Jerusalem. What I want you to notice is there's an absence of a reference to the god Ashur. And again, it's just a small quote, but we might notice that. And then we might notice the lack of violence. We get, here's what I did in a well-ordered, this is what any great general would do in attacking a city. But we don't hear that he won. And for the complete story, we have to go to Isaiah 36 through 38 to get the complete story. So here's, though, what Sennacherib wrote. As to Hezekiah the Jew, he did not submit to my yoke. I laid siege to 46 of his strong cities, walled forts, and countless small villages in their vicinity, and conquered them by means of well-stamped earth ramps and battering rams brought thus near to the walls, combined with the attack by foot soldiers using mines, breaches, as well as sapper work. Himself I made a prisoner in Jerusalem, his royal residence like a bird in a cage. I surrounded him with earthwork in order to molest those who were leaving his city's gate. So did you see the two things that it seemed to me at least were missing? So Hezekiah, though, when you think about the threat that Assyria was, and you realize that the northern kingdom has fallen to Assyria, and most of the cities of the southern kingdom have also fallen, and what is left to Hezekiah is the walled city of Jerusalem, you can see how he is put together like a prisoner, a bird in a cage. But it doesn't say he ever took Jerusalem. And for the full story, we're going to have to check the biblical text. Here's some interesting actual history. I love carvings and reliefs because they tell the story better than we could. So here's the relief that was at Lachish, or describing the Battle of Lachish. And you can see the picture on the left. Those are the people impaled on pikes. You see it? And then the picture on the right has captives being led off into captivity, one after another after another. And then the picture on the bottom has some archers and showing how they would have been perhaps arrayed in battle. And so I love the real pictures of the things that we've been talking about. You check out Isaiah 36 through 38. Pay careful attention to the way the crisis in Jerusalem is described, the concern for the water supply, and the visit of the ambassadors, and then you will better understand the role of Isaiah as the prophet of God shows up to speak to the king of Judah and to give God's intervention a prophetic announcement. So you check it out and let me know what you think. Thanks for listening.